I'm gonna go ahead.
Okay, well, we can go ahead and get started because it's 2:01, and so I always like to go ahead and get started right on time if we could. So I want to welcome those who are online. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Discover the State Library series on presidential research at the South Carolina State Library. I am Hannah Majewski. I am one of the public services librarians here on staff at the State Library. And helping me today is Virginia Pierce, who will be working with me on the slideshow presentation. She is the Director of Digitization and Collections, so she will be helping me as well. Today, we'll be showing you some of our presidential resources, focusing on the time the presidents were in office. We do have other resources such as pamphlets on visiting presidential sites and books on presidential homes, in addition to a wealth of other information. However, our specific topic today will be focusing on the presidential papers we have in our collection. Okay, Virginia, if you'll turn the page for me. So first, we're going to start with some background on federal publications. The federal government publishes documents and distributes them to various organizations, including libraries. The main reasons government publishes information is for use by all forms of government, use by citizens, and of course, to sell its information. Next slide. So who provides this information? How is this information distributed? It starts with the government printing office and then to the Federal Depository Library Program, and then to specified depository libraries, of which the South Carolina State Library is one, and then to the public. So let's discuss a little more about the FDLP. Next slide. Here's some information on the Federal Depository Library Program. As you can see, we get the opportunity, each depository library gets the opportunity to select what information they wish to receive. In South Carolina, there are about 12 public libraries where the state library distributes documents. This does not include academic or other special libraries, but specifically public libraries. Next page. So now we're going to start talking about the public papers of the presidents of the United States. So the public papers of the presidents are considered federal documents, and the state library receives copies of these documents in book-bound form. So let me show you some of what our older collection or older volumes look like. Next page. Let's begin with this book series titled Messages and Papers of the Presidents. Papers can include veto messages, biographies, war memos, etc. The examples I'm going to use are from famous presidents. Next page. So this is volume 1 of the series. The spine of the book shows the title, the author, volume number, and dates included in this volume. In this example, it's volume 1 with the years 1789 to 1817. The presidents discussed in this volume will be George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. You can see where the arrow is pointing, and that shows where the years of what's included inside that volume. Next page. When we open to the table of contents, we see the volume begins with the first president, George Washington, and includes his portrait, biographical sketch, first inaugural address, replies from the Senate and House to the inaugural address, and special messages. In addition, there is information relating to second and third presidents, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Each volume contains similar information on each of the presidents. And I put little arrows here on the very far left-hand side, I have an arrow pointing to specifically George Washington, and it shows you on each page as to where the presidents will be located inside the volume. So you can see, and the presidents are listed in service order. So you'll see George Washington first, and then you'll see John Adams, and then you'll see Thomas Jefferson. And I just wanted to point that out to you with the arrows. The next slide. Here's the final page of the table of contents. So this particular volume goes from President Washington to President Madison. Next slide. So let's see some specific information in these books. Let's start with George Washington. He was the first president of the United States. Next slide. And here's a part of Washington's first inaugural address and a proclamation for a national Thanksgiving to be on the 26th of November for the people of the United States, a day of public thanksgiving. This was the first national celebration of the holiday under the new Constitution. It wasn't until President Lincoln in 1863 declared Thanksgiving a national holiday on the last Thursday in November to urge the nation to heal its wounds and restore peace, harmony, and tranquility in the Union. More about Thanksgiving can be found at blogs.loc.gov, a presidential history of Thanksgiving. But we see here that Washington was, after we won the Revolution, was interested in having the country come together and celebrate a day of national Thanksgiving, just to celebrate our freedom from Britain and all that we had accomplished to become a nation of our own. Next slide. Moving on, we see a message from John Langdon announcing Washington as the first president. Now, Langdon was one of the first U.S. senators from New Hampshire. And on the other side, we see that Washington has written out his acceptance message. And all of these documents are inside this volume that I showed you earlier in the slideshow. Next page. Washington's statement in Washington's statement, he declines being considered among others whom a choice is to be made. And this is his farewell address. Now, there is a lot more information about Washington than what I provided in this presentation. I'm only showing the highlights due to time constraints and wanting to show you other research options out there. Now, this is not all we have on Washington. Remember that there is a lot more information about Washington's terms in office in this book and his messages to Congress. These are just the highlights I selected. Next slide, please. So now we're going to jump into Thomas Jefferson, who was the third president of the United States. And in between Washington and Jefferson, John Adams was the president. I've just again selected some papers from a few of the earlier presidents to show what's in the books. Now, there is information about John Adams in the books, but we're going to go ahead and jump right into Thomas Jefferson. Next slide. So Thomas Jefferson, here are some papers validating Jefferson as president and his acceptance of the office. The notification of election to Jefferson and part of his reply, guided by the wisdom and patriotism of those to whom it belongs to express the legislative will of the nation, I will give to that will a faithful execution. The second letter is Jefferson's notification on a proposal of when to take office. You can read all this online, and I have the web link there, or his entire reply is also in this volume. One of Jefferson's memorable actions is the Louisiana Purchase. Here are two special messages regarding such purchase from France. The first message, where Jefferson announces before the Senate asking if they will consent to the ratification for the Louisiana Purchase from France. You can read the entire treaty in the book or go online and read. And there's the link there in the slide. Next slide, please. More messages from Jefferson to the Senate and House regarding the transaction that occurred during the acceptance of Louisiana. Plenty of militia were on hand in case any problems during the transaction. The governor of Mississippi and General Wilkinson, who was eventually appointed the first governor of Louisiana, received possession of Louisiana. And here are just some statements that I found in the book acknowledging the acceptance of the land and talking about General Wilkinson and being on hand to accept the transaction. Next slide. So in case you didn't remember, why did France sell Louisiana? France's ruler at the time, Napoleon, was no longer interested in establishing the North American Empire. So he just wanted to get rid of the land, and he agreed to sell it to the United States. And also, the United States' main goal was not to purchase Louisiana, but it was just to only purchase New Orleans. So that's why we ended up with Louisiana, was that because Bonaparte, he wanted to get rid of the land and he agreed to sell it to the United States, even though the United States just wanted New Orleans. We ended up getting the whole state. So let's continue on to see what other information is in this volume and series. Next slide. So now we're jumping into Abraham Lincoln, and he is located in volume 6 of this same series. Volume 6 discusses Presidents Abraham Lincoln to Andrew Johnson. So let's take a look at just a couple of items in Lincoln's papers that are also included in this volume. Next page. Here is volume 6 for the years 1861 to 1869. And in this particular volume, we have Abraham Lincoln to Andrew Johnson. Next slide. So this volume provides the types of information found in other volumes of this same series. Here we see Lincoln's proclamation to call 75,000 members of the Union militia to suppress the South secession. Next slide. Here's to notice Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president, received announcing Lincoln's death and his qualifications as president. Again, keep in mind that all of the president's correspondence, ideas, and records are located in these bound volumes. But due to time constraints, I'm only listing a few. Of course, there's a lot more information about Lincoln in this volume. And so we're going to keep moving on. And next page, please. So we have 2 sets of volumes here of collections. As new presidents were elected, additional volumes were needed to be produced. Newer collections contain information on presidents elected after the last series was printed, but also contains the same information on previous presidents. Next slide. So let's begin on how to search the presidential resources in our collection. Each set of the messages and papers of the president has an appendix that is identified on the spine of the book. You can see here where I've highlighted that in red in a red box. Next slide. The appendix information is the same in all collections. Let's look at this example. So on the first slide, you see how the information is listed in alphabetical order. In the center, you see how the listings appear in the appendix. And in the third, the number represents the page number and are listed in the spine of the book. So all the page numbers that are in that particular volume are going to be listed on the spine of the book. So that's how you'll be able to see which volume you will need. Next slide. So let's use a real life example. Let's look at Abraham Lincoln's death. This is volume 11 of a set of messages and papers of the presidents. In the appendix, we see that there is a multiple information on Lincoln, including the assassination, death of his child, Congress action after Lincoln's death. The page number is located beside each entry. Next slide. We'll want to make sure we pull the correct volume. The page numbers are located on the spine. So once the correct volume is located, you will go to the indicated page and locate your information. Next slide. Beginning with Herbert Hoover, each president thereafter has his own set of presidential papers bound individually. These are a few examples. Each book of each series has its own index in the back, unlike the previous series we showed whether there was a separate book for the index. These books are printed for each year of the president's term in office. Note the electronic versions of these series are online. We don't have President Trump's collection yet, so the last collection we have would be from President Obama. Next slide. So let's take a look at more information, more recent president who has papers book bound with his own information, such as Ronald Reagan. You can go online to govinfo.gov to find his information. We also have a separate bonus of presidential collections on President Kennedy. Next slide. The John F. Kennedy assassination hearings. This has all the information, testimony, witness statements, case files of what happened the day Kennedy was shot. Note the electronic version of these series are online as well. In this series, there is a separate series for the exhibits in numerical order, testimony by witness by alpha order. So there's two sets of books, one for the exhibits and one for the witnesses. The exhibits are in a numerical order, and the witness testimony is in alpha order. Next slide. Here's just what it looks like on the spine of the book. Here's a series that lists the witnesses' names on the spine of the book, and then what it looks like on the inside page of the book. Next slide, please. I pulled some witness testimony at random. You will see what's included in the books, exactly what transpired in the courtroom. So you have the actual questions and the testimony from the witnesses and the lawyers and what exactly was going on during the trial. Next slide, please. So now that you know some of what we have, how do you search our collections? Well, we're going to talk about a little bit how you can search for more information. So let's first go to our homepage and click on the Search the Catalog link. Next slide, please. In the box, type in your subject matter. So let's type in John F. Kennedy hearings and hit search. Next slide, please. See that it brought up 28 results. You can scroll down the list to find which book you're searching specifically for. We see on the list that it's the first one listed. The one that we just went over is the first one listed here. Also note that the library you're searching is a South Carolina State Library where the purple arrow is. You can change the location or library by clicking on the drop-down box or drop-down arrow, and you can change how you do your search either by keyword, author, title, or subject. Next slide, please. You can also change how you do your search either by keyword, author, title, and subject with the blue arrow is. Next slide, please. Also note that the library you're searching is a South Carolina State Library where the purple arrow is. You can change the location of the library by clicking the drop-down arrow, and you can change it to either any one of our South Carolina Lens libraries, which I believe are about 13 or 14 of them at this point. Next slide, please. And this is just another sample of what we were looking at a few seconds ago, a few slides ago. You can see where the blue arrow indicates where you can search by, change the search by keyword or author title. Next slide, please. In order to request the information or to place a hold, you'll need to use your state library card. When the book is available, you will either be notified to come pick it up. This is the same process for all the other books, except if they are in for in-house viewing only. Next slide, please. Another source of information on our website for presidential research, besides our catalog, is a database called Newsbank. Newsbank provides access to a lot of old and current newspapers from around the country in South Carolina. Let's look at an example. Next slide, please. Let's go back to the State Library's homepage and click on South Carolinians and then the Research and Resources link, as I have indicated here with a red arrow. Next slide, please. Click on the Resources database. Next slide, please. At the top is a list from A to Z. Click on the N and you will see a link for a database for Newsbank. So click on it. Next slide. And you'll come to a page where you can search for events, names, topics, etc. There's an option to add additional search options such as dates. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a search for Abraham Lincoln for the period of 1840 to 1865. You can see on this page that you can search by a specific state. Let's continue with our search. Next slide, please. And here we can find articles related to Lincoln. It's just another way to gather information on your subject matter. Note that there are filters on the left side where you can give a range of how you want to store your information. You can search by all newspapers in the U.S. or just South Carolina. Next slide, please. Here are some other resources we're going to discuss. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at the Library of Congress website. Start with clicking on the Digital Collections tab, which I have marked with a red box. Next slide. Here you can refine your results by topic. Let's click on American History. Next slide, please. And we find some more information about Abraham Lincoln and Alexander Hamilton, among other collections that have been digitized. Let's click on Abraham Lincoln. Let's click on Abraham Lincoln's papers to see what we can find. Next slide, please. This page provides links to his inaugural address, preliminary draft of the Emancipation Proclamation, the Gettysburg Address, and a condolence letter written by Queen Victoria to Mary Todd Lincoln, among other treasures. There is a list of teaching and expert resources on the left side for assistance. Next slide, please. As you scroll down the page, you will find additional information as to how the papers were acquired. Next slide, please. Each series of Lincoln's papers are described for easier research. Next slide. On the home page, if you're not able to find your information that you're looking for, there is a link to Ask a Librarian. Next page, please. So now we're going to move to another option that's available out there for research, presidential research, and that's the National Archives that has a wealth of searchable information. Next slide, please. Scroll down to the bottom of National Archives homepage and click on A to Z Index. Let's search for Harry S. Truman. We find that we have to click on another link to the Truman Presidential Library and Museum that houses his papers, photographs, interviews, etc. The good thing is, if National Archives doesn't have it, they will link you to who may have it. So, for example, if I search Abraham Lincoln, next slide, please, I won't find a specific listing for him. So we'll have to search for Lincoln a different way. It may get frustrating searching, but don't give up. I also search under keys for president. Next slide, please. But it doesn't give a specific line for president. So sometimes it's a hit or miss while searching. But I'll show you a way that you can search and immediately gather the information you want. However, let's see an example that does show up on the list. Next page, please. Harry S. Truman Museum and Library is listed. So let's click on it and it brings you to, next slide, please. The Harry Truman Library with information of maps, photos, personal papers, genealogy. The art of searching is patience and for the information you're looking for. And it does sometimes take a lot of patience, but if you keep searching and keep clicking, you will eventually find some information that will help. Next slide, please. Another way to type a name into the search box on the home page. Here I typed in Harry S. Truman, or we could type in Abraham Lincoln. And I get a lot of links to find information. I did a side-by-side comparison of Truman and Lincoln to see that you'll get similar results when you search a name from that National Archives website. It also tells you the number of results available. So for example, Lincoln has 4,600 results and Truman has over 5,800. We'll see in a few slides some more information that National Archives has on presidential libraries. But next, let's look at some more newspapers. Next slide, please. Earlier, we discussed Newsbank on the State Library's website. Another newspaper database is offered through the Library of Congress called Chronicling America, a list of newspapers from around the country from 1770 to 1963. The newspapers may have articles of presidential interest and may include some verbiage from speeches, explanations of vetoes or proclamations, deaths, corruption, etc. So let's do a search on President James Garfield. Next page, please. Garfield served as president only 200 days in 1880 to 1881 before he was shot and killed. When I search Chronicling America under 1881 and James A. Garfield, I get over 20 million pages from all over. Next slide, please. And here's a page I pulled at random. It's from the Morris Tribune in Minnesota announcing Garfield's impending death. Next slide, please. Here's another paper from the Wilmington, Delaware, with a biography on President Garfield and President Arthur. It's interesting to read the spins on or information that newspapers reported. Reporters back then were no different than they are today. Another resource available for presidential research are the presidential libraries. Next page, please. Only a few presidents have libraries online. For every president since Herbert Hoover, presidential libraries have been established in each president's home state where the documents and artifacts and other information are stored. So you can go online and look at what they have in their presidential library, and you can take an online virtual tour. Next slide, please. National Archives also has links to presidential libraries. They have links to museum virtual tours and artifact collections. So here I'm going to click on Explore Our Exhibits. Next page, please. And you can read all about the various exhibits and virtual tours available. If you scroll further down, you can see featured online exhibits from presidential libraries and museums. Next slide, please. There's also a link to digital artifacts collections, so let's see what that offers. Next slide, please. In this case, the first two links were broken, but the third worked, so let's take a look at Lyndon B. Johnson's library and museum. Next slide, please. The LBJ Library and Museum has a variety of artifacts in its collection. You can click on the links above to see additional pieces. Next slide, please. A few other things in our collection that may be helpful if doing research on presidents or other notable people or monuments. Next slide, please. Are the historic structure reports. A historic structure report provides documentary, graphic, and physical information about a property's history and existing condition. Broadly recognized as an effective part of preservation planning, a historic structure report also addresses management or owner goals for the use or reuse of the property. The historic structures are maintained by the National Park Service. So what I'm getting ready to show is just a few that we have in our collection. And you can see here what I have listed on some of the historic structure reports we have in our library will be the Statue of Liberty, the Franklin Roosevelt home, the Theodore Roosevelt home, the Carl Sandburg, the Abraham Lincoln home, and many other options are monuments and national parks. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at one of the books in our collection, The Home of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Next slide, please. At the beginning is a table of contents. Here's a sampling of what part of this book contains. Next slide, please. Here's a description of Franklin Roosevelt's bedroom. We can read the details provided in these reports, such as lower on this page that you can't see. It says that a doorway is missing a doorknob and another doorway has a single glazed wooden door containing 12 lights, which even goes into further detail saying that of the 12 lights, 3 lights are across and 4 lights are down. So it gets very specific as to the details. It also has pictures. Here's a photo of Franklin D. Roosevelt's bedroom. And here are some rooms on the second floor of the house that are listed that will also have descriptive information about them. And here's a book on, next page, please. Here's a book on Teddy Roosevelt's house in Oyster Bay, New York. Next slide, please. And you can see the same information is provided as in FDR's book. Next slide, please. Here's the outside photo of Teddy Roosevelt's house, and the book contains photos of the inside too. Next slide, please. So if you want to go visit some of these historical places, the National Park Department or National Park Services, we have pamphlets distributed by them on visiting historic sites. Since we were talking about since we were talking about Franklin D. Roosevelt, I pulled this one to show as an example. Next slide, please. And here's the back of the pamphlet. We also have pamphlets on visiting other places in and out of the United States. If we don't have it, we can either get it for you or tell you how to get it. So on the back of this map is on the hexagon, the blue hexagon over there on the left, that is Franklin D. Roosevelt's residence. In the red circle, you'll see Henry A. Wallace Visitor Center, and Wallace was FDR's vice president from 1941 to 1945. In the light blue square, that's the FDR Museum and Library. And where the red arrow is pointing, it's called Belfield, and it's one of the oldest colonial houses on the Hudson River, but it's now closed. So this pamphlets also gives you information about a specific area, but it also gives you information about areas around in the vicinity that you might want to visit as well. If you ever need any help, librarians are here. We're more than happy to help you. You can reach out and give us a call or reach out and email us. Next slide, please. And that is all I had for today. I did not take the full hour. So if there's any questions or anything, please put them in the chat and let me know.
That was so interesting, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you run across anything that you're like, oh, wow, this is my favorite thing that I've seen down there?
I think my most favorite thing is looking at the historic residences and just seeing how detailed they get and what is available, especially with, I looked at the one for the Statue of Liberty, the Historic Structure Report, and it has just photos of how run down it is, which is really surprising. Photos from back in the early days and how it's changed from then until now is real interesting and just seeing really what else needs to be taken care of. But going back again, looking at some of the historic houses like FDR or the Roosevelts or Eleanor Roosevelt's, it's just interesting to see how in-depth and how detailed they get. If they're going to mention a missing doorknob, or they're going to indicate how many lights and in what direction those lights are in, I find the devil's in the details. I love hearing the dirty details about what's going on in a building or something. So,
Great. Brianna wrote, thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
She said it's a great time to learn about these resources with the upcoming elections. That's true.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we kind of wanted to do it now, because it is, President's Month and an election this year. So
that's right. And we picked today or Hannah picked today because it's Washington's birthday today. So we thought that was appropriate.
That's right. Yeah.
And Melanie, thank you. She said, yes, thank you. Had no idea we have the court transcripts of the Warren Commission. It's fascinating stuff.
Thank you,
Melanie. That's great.
Okay, well, I'm sorry it didn't take the full hour. I know I probably ran through that very fast. I didn't mean to talk as fast as I did. But yeah, but thank you so much. And thank y'all's patience with me as I breezed through this and bumbled across a few things. But thank you so much for your patience. I really appreciate it.
Welcome. That was great.
All right. All right. Any other questions or anything?
We have more presentations coming up. So if you've tuned in for this one and want to attend another one in the future, just stay. You can sign up for the State Library newsletter and some of our social media channels and to stay apprised of upcoming events. So Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.